Does Luke want to have lunch with Scott?
Does Luke want to have lunch with Scott?
No, that's not what he wants. Luke doesn't want to have lunch with
No,
Scott.
that's not once.
What does
Luke
Luke
doesn't
want?
to have lunch with Scott. What does Luke want?
Luke wants to meet
Luke
with Scott.
wants to meet with Scott.
Does Luke want to borrow money from Scott?
Does Luke want to borrow money from Scott? No, Luke doesn't want to borrow money from Scott.
No, Luke doesn't want to borrow money from Scott.
What does Luke
What
want?
does Luke want?
Luke wants to meet with Scott.
Luke wants to meet with Scott. Does Luke want to have a
Does
meeting
Luke
with
want to
Scott?
have a meeting with Scott? Yes, that's correct. Luke wants to meet with Scott, which is the same
Yes,
thing
that's
as saying
correct. Luke wants to meet with Scott,
Luke wants to
which
have
is
a
the same
meeting
thing
with
as
Scott.
saying that Luke
To
wants
meet
to
with
have a meeting
someone
with
means to
Scott.
have a meeting with
To meet
someone.
with someone means to have a meeting with someone. Does Luke think the meeting will last all day?
Does Luke think the meeting will last all day?
No, Luke doesn't think the meeting will last all day.
No, Luke doesn't think the meeting will last all
How
day.
long does he think the meeting will
How
last?
long does he think the meeting will last?
He thinks the meeting will last about 3 hours.
He thinks the meeting will last about
Does he
3
think
hours.
the meeting will last more than 4 hours?
Does he think the meeting will last more than 4 hours?
No, he doesn't think the meeting will last more than 4
No, he
hours.
doesn't think the meeting will last more than 4
How
hours.
long does he think the meeting will
How
last?
long does he think the meeting will last?
He thinks the meeting will last
He
about
thinks the
3
meeting will
hours.
last about 3 hours.
Does Scott have time for meetings this
Does
week?
Scott have time for meetings this week?
No, Scott doesn't have time for meetings this
No,
week.
Scott doesn't
He's
have
very
time for
busy.
meetings this week. He's very
Is
busy.
Scott a little busy or
Is
very
Scott a
busy
little
this
busy
week?
or very busy this week?
Scott is very busy this
busy
week.
this week.
Will the meeting
Will
between Luke and Scott take place this week?
Will it between Luke and Scott take place this week?
No, the meeting
No,
between
the
Luke and Scott
meeting
will not take
between
place this week.
Luke and Scott will not
When
take
will the
place
meeting
this
take
week.
place?
When will the meeting take place?
The meeting will take place
The
next
meeting
week.
will take place next week.
Is it true that the meeting will take
that
place
true?
next week instead of
Well-
this week?
The meeting next week instead of this week?
Yes, it's true. The meeting will take place next week instead of this week.
Yes, it's true. The meeting will next week instead of this week.
Why will the meeting take place next week instead of this week?
Why will the meeting next week instead of this week?
Well, the meeting will take place next week instead of this week because Scott is very busy this week.
Well, the meeting next week instead of this week because Scott is very busy this week.
Now, let's help Luke and Scott figure out the best day next week to set up their meeting.
Now, let's have a look at Scott figure out the best day instead of this week.
Looking at the schedules for Luke and Scott for next week.
You're looking
I'm going to
at
ask
you're looking at the schedules for Luke and Scott figure out on next week.
questions based on their schedules.
I have an asked question about asked questions.
Will Luke be in the office on Monday?
Will Luke be in the office on Monday?
Yes, he will. Luke will be in the office on Monday.
Yes, he will. Luke
What
be
about
in the
Scott?
office on
Will
Monday.
Scott be in the office
What
on
about
Monday?
Scott? Will Scott be in the office on Monday?
No, he won't. Scott won't be in the office on Monday.
No, he won't.
Who won't be in the office on Monday?
Will be in the office on Monday. Who won't be in the office on Monday?
It's Scott.
Scott
won't be in the office on Monday. Is it true that
Is
Scott
it
will be
true
absent from work
that
on Monday?
That Scott will be in the office on
Yes,
Monday?
that's true. Scott will be absent from work on Monday.
Yes, that's true. Scott will be
Can they set up their meeting on
in
Monday?
the office back on the office on Monday. That's Scott on the office on Monday?
No, they cannot set up their meeting on Monday.
No, they cannot set up the meeting.
Why can't they set up their
Monday?
meeting on Monday?
Why can't they set up the meeting on Monday?
Well, they can't set up their meeting on Monday
They
because
can't
Scott won't be in the office. He'll be on vacation.
Monday because Scott is.
Will Luke be on vacation next week?
It's not in the office. Scott will be in vacation.
No, Luke won't be on vacation next week.
Is Luke will be in vacation next week? No, Luke doesn't want in the vacation next week.
Who will be on vacation next week?
Who won't be on? Will be.
Scott will be on vacation.
Who will be in the vacation next week?
Vacation next week.
Scott will be in vacation next week.
Will he be on vacation for 5 days?
Well, Scott will be in the office on Friday.
No, he won't be on vacation for 5 days.
He won't be in the office on 5 days.
Going to be a short vacation.
It wants to be a short vacation.
How many days will he be on vacation?
How many days will be in vacation?
He'll be on vacation for 3 days.
He'll be in vacation.
Will Scott be in the office on Monday?
On 3 days. Will Scott will be in the office on Monday? Oh,
no, Scott won't be in the office on Monday.
No, he won't be in the office on Monday. On Monday.
Does that mean they can't set up their meeting on Monday?
They can't set up their meeting on Monday.
Kinh doanh online thuộc 6 dạng này đừng bao giờ mong ra đơn. 1. Không biết cách chọn sai.
Yes, that's exactly right. That means they can't set up their meeting on Monday.
Look what, they cannot start their meeting on Monday.
What about Tuesday? Can they set up their meeting on Tuesday?
Can they set up their meeting on Tuesday?
No, they still can't set up their meeting on Tuesday.
No, they can't. No.
Why can't they set up their meeting on?
No, they still can up their meeting on Tuesday. Why can't they set up? Why can't they can they start their meeting on Tuesday?
On Tuesday. Well, they can't set up their meeting on Tuesday because Scott won't be in the office.
Well, they can't. Meeting on Tuesday because Scott will be in the office.
Who will be absent from work on Tuesday?
Who will be back of office on Tuesday?
It's Scott. Scott will be absent from work on Tuesday.
It's Scott.
Will Scott be back on Wednesday?
Back on Tuesday. Will Scott will be back on Wednesday?
No, he won't. Scott won't be back on Wednesday.
No, he won't. Scott will be back on Wednesday.
When will Scott be back?
When will Scott be back?
Scott will be back on Thursday.
Scott will be back on
Will
Thursday.
Scott be absent from work on Thursday?
Does Scott at work on Thursday?
No, Scott won't be absent from work on Thursday.
No, Scott will be back on Scott on Thursday.
He'll be in the office.
He'll be in the office.
All right, so Scott will be back on Thursday. Does that mean they can set up their meeting on Thursday?
All right. Scott will be in the office on Thursday. Can they set up their meeting on Thursday?
Unfortunately, no. They still can't set up their meeting on Thursday.
Unfortunately, no. They still can't set up their meeting Tuesday. on Thursday?
Why can't they set up their meeting on Thursday?
Why can't they set up their meeting on Thursday?
Well, they can't set up their meeting on Thursday because Luke won't be in the office. He has
Well, they can't will be in the office because have their meeting Thursday because Luke will be in the office.
a doctor's appointment that day.
He's supposed to go doctor appointment that day.
Who has a doctor's appointment on Thursday?
Who has a doctor appointment that day?
It's Luke. Luke has a doctor's appointment on Thursday.
It's Luke. Luke will be back on Thursday. Luke have a doctor appointment on Thursday.
Does Scott have any doctor's appointments next week?
Does Scott have any doctor appointment next week?
No, Scott doesn't have any doctor's appointments next week.
No, Scott doesn't have any doctor appointment next week.
Tell me again, why can't they set up their meeting on Thursday?
Tell me again, why can't they set up the meeting on Thursday?
They can't set up their meeting on Thursday because Luke has a doctor's appointment that day.
They can't set up the meeting on Thursday because Luke has a doctor appointment on that day.
So he won't be in the office.
He won't be in the. He won't be.
Will
in the
Luke
office.
be in the office on Friday?
Will Luke be in the office on Friday?
Yes, he will. Luke will be in the office on Friday.
Yes, he will. Luke
What about
will be in
Scott?
the office on
Will Scott be in the
Friday.
office on Friday as well?
What about Scott? Will Scott will be in the office on Friday as well?
Yes, Scott will be in the office on Friday as well.
Yes, Scott will be in the. Yes, Scott will be in the office on Friday as well.
Can they set up their meeting on Friday?
Can they set up their meeting Friday?
Yes, they can set up their meeting that day.
Yes, they can set up their meeting. Yes, they can set up their meeting that day.
Will both Luke and Scott be in the office on Friday?
Will Luke, both and Scott on meeting on Tuesday on that day? Friday?
Yes, they will. Both Luke and Scott will be in the office on Friday.
Yes, we will. Both Luke and Scott on meeting on the office on Friday.
They can set up their meeting that day.
They can set up their meeting on that day.